Hey guys, how's it going? This is the bearded version of Ethan reporting in for another build video. It's been about a year or maybe over a year since my last one, so I figured it was time to make another one. What I'm going to be making here is this box that I'm going to be using to transport these small miniature units for this new game I'm playing called War Machines. Yeah, it was an enjoyable process to make it. I'm really happy with the way it turned out. So yeah, why don't we get some close-ups and look at some of the features of it.
The main joint which holds this project together is a box joint. The fingers are 3/4 of an inch wide, and I cut them out on the table saw, which you'll be seeing. The handle is made from one piece of red oak, and it took a bit of work to shape it like this. It's held in place with only glue, but that will be plenty strong. The back sits flush with the sides. I did this by cutting a rabbet in the back, which allows a thinner piece of it to fit in a groove cut all the way around on the inside of the 4 connecting pieces. The front stays closed with a magnetic latch and opens with 2 hinges near the bottom. I had trouble with the front board bowing, which you'll see, so the 2 pieces on the sides help keep it flatter. As always, the process starts with milling. I'll go through this kind of fast since I think the joinery and more technical aspects are more interesting. I'm using rough sawn red oak and milling most of it to about a 1/2 inch thick. Thank goodness for bandsaws, eh? Now it's time to begin cutting the box joints. I start by installing my dado set with a 3/4 inch configuration. Using a dado set with this saw-stop table saw required me to get a different blade brake cartridge. Initially, I was going to forego the safety mechanism for making these box joints, but unfortunately, that turned out not to be an option. The box joints ended up being a little bit tight for my liking. The tightness would make the glue up more difficult. I decided the best plan of action was to shave a bit off of both sides of each finger. I did this with a fine-toothed file, trying hard to always cut the whole inside of the finger with every stroke. After this process, the fingers fit together well. I squared and flattened some smaller pieces to be used as the back. Here, I'm gluing them up into one panel. Next, I had to do the same thing, but for the door on the front. My goal was to make this out of a single piece of wood, but without cutting into a brand new board, I couldn't do it. So I found 2 pieces that grain matched pretty well and used those. The wider of the 2 ends up giving me some trouble. So now it's time to make the handle. As I mentioned in the intro, it's made from one piece of wood, shaped to my liking. I'll start with making a template on a piece of cardboard. The cardboard is actually sitting on the wood I'll be using for this part. The template is just half of the handle. This way I can flip the template over and have both halves symmetrical. The last step is lining up a Forstner bit and making a divot so I know where to drill when it's on the drill press. Drilling these holes just gives me an easy way to cut an interior corner of the handle instead of doing it on a bandsaw or something else. This was a part where I didn't really have a solid plan. My goal was to make the handle thinner at the top so it was easier to grab, but keep the feet near the bottom wide for maximum gluing surface area. What I ended up doing actually worked pretty well. I used my dovetail saw to make 2 cuts for each side, one coming straight down from the top and a diagonal cut coming up from the bottom. Then I used a chisel, rasp, file, and sandpaper to finish up the shaping of the handle. There was over a half hour of footage of me shaping this handle, so I'm going to save some time and skip right to the end. There we go. That's a handle. Later that day, after the glue had dried, I worked on flattening the back with my smoothing plane and a little elbow grease. After cutting the back square and to size, I needed to make the rabbet on all 4 edges. I did this by making shallow cuts with a table saw, scooching the fence a bit, and making the cuts again. The first cut mattered the most because that sets up the width of the rabbet. Now to make the groove in all 4 pieces that the back will slide into. This is done in a similar way. Keep in mind that even though I look super talented and just fearlessly make all these cuts, a lot of test cutting and fitting goes into the process. Without it, screwing up any of these cuts would cause me to have to remake 1 or more pieces. I'd say it's about time for some satisfying test fitting. This was the first time I assembled everything but the door. Notice the little gap that runs around the outside of the back. Since I'm not gluing the back in place, this gap allows for a little bit of seasonal movement with the back piece of wood. Before gluing everything up, I use some painter's tape to keep the wood clean from squeezed out glue. After I have all the clamps in place, I'll pull the pieces of tape off and the squeeze out will come with them. It's finally time to glue up the box. This glue up is somewhat difficult, not in its complexity, but in racing against the glue curing clock. There are many faces of wood that need to be completely covered with glue before clamping it all in place. If I move too slowly, the glue will begin to cure and the joint won't be as strong. This is playing at 30 times speed. The whole glue up actually took about 11 minutes. I couldn't let you get away without me showing off my homemade pipe clamp vise. I have a different video up that describes it, but it does a great job at holding the whole box secure while I work on one face of it. Remember the grooves I cut on the inside that the back fits in? Well, I'll be darned if some of those grooves left holes on the outside of our box. Here's the process I'm using to fill one of those holes. Installing the hinges wasn't particularly fun. I think I must have been doing it wrong, so maybe take this advice with caution. I placed them where they needed to be, used a pencil to transfer the holes from the hinges, carefully punched a starter hole in the middle of the circles with an awl, and drilled a shallow hole for the small screws, making sure not to go through the board. The screws going into the bottom are just a smidge long. At that length, they would poke out the bottom side. I used a file to make some particularly dreadful sounds and also shorten the screws.
Alright, so I'm to this part in the project, and I've got the magnet in there. There's a few problems going on. So, first of all, one of the easier ones, there's a gap on the left side and a gap on the right side. The gap on the left side is about half as wide, or maybe even less, as the gap on the right side. So I need to just cut away a little, like a 1/16 of an inch of material over here to make it look symmetrical. Okay, second of all, our magnet is barely holding. See, it doesn't even want to hold. And the reason for that is the hinge is just the hinges themselves are pushing out. They don't want to be completely closed because the screw heads on the inside are taking up room and pushing against the opposite side. So I'll have to make little divots for those screw heads to sit in, and then that should go away. And the third and I don't know, the worst problem I would say is that this is bowing pretty bad, or cupping I think is the right term. So you can see that in the camera there, this crazy cupping action, and it's actually happening the opposite way that this grain would indicate. So I don't know what's going on there, but anyway, I need to come up with a way to flatten this bad boy out. So that's what I'm going to do next here.
My plan to combat the cupping is to add pieces to the sides which will force the board flat. The first step is to trim equal amounts from both sides of the door. Next, I need to cut a tenon into both sides of the door to add those support pieces. I finish up these tenon cuts with chisels. For the support pieces, I use the table saw to cut the groove in those. I first make the cut in one direction, flip the board, and make the cut again. This assures the cut is perfectly centered. Now when I apply some clamping pressure with the door elevated only in the middle, you can see it straighten out. Once straightened, the support pieces easily slide right on. After making some careful marks, I can trim the door to width. And now I've centered the handle on the top and applied tape around anywhere glue could squeeze out. Once clamped, I can pull the tape off and there shouldn't be any glue left on visible surfaces. This is important because there's no hiding any renegade glue here. I bet you've never seen landscaping bricks used to apply clamping pressure in a woodworking project before. I did record applying a water-based finish, but the video wasn't great, and after all, it was kind of boring.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the build process. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed building it. I'm really happy with the way it turned out. I'm going to get a lot of use out of it, carrying around these little miniature nerd units, and then after that I'm sure it'll be put to use doing something else. So yeah, if you liked the video, click the like button below and subscribe. Also, leave any comments or questions that you have about it, and I'll be sure to reply right away. So thanks, and see you guys later.